Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation webinar on how might I use the out of possession principles of play to help my players solve game challenges. First of all, if we break down what these out of possession principles of plays actually are, is they're actually the foundations that allow your team to regain the ball whilst also looking to protect the goal, which is crucial when you're out of possession of the ball. The first one we're going to look at is delaying. So this is all about denying space by dictating some form of direction and speed of attack from the opposition. And an example of this is we might position ourselves on the pitch, or our players might position ourselves on the pitch to prevent them passes being played through us, basically. It's all about delaying the speed of the attack and the direction of the attack. So we've got two players highlighted in black circles here. They're actually preventing that forward option in terms of the player running through or passing the ball through. So if we look at this clip now, what they're actually inviting the player on the ball to actually do is to actually play inside the pitch. And when we break that down into this sort of clip that we've got here, they're actually delaying the opportunity for the team to play through them and actually play around them, but actually into an area where they've got more bodies. So we can see there they've got 4 players. So they've delayed the attack, they've slowed it down, but then they've also dictated the direction that attack's going to move into, almost making play predictable. There's a lot of perception and challenges around coaching, and actually, if they were playing in a smaller format, we can't be compact, but actually we can see in this example, there's a prime example of 2 players are actually using compactness to actually regain the ball. So as you can see, their compact shape is actually inviting the team in blue and white to play around them. So yet again, making play predictable, forcing certain passes to make it easier to defend. By restricting the passes being played through, like I've just touched on, it lets the opposition play around us. And yet again, the compactness element comes in by making sure the distance between you and your partner isn't really big. So by reducing the space between you and your mate, they can't play through you. And it's actually inviting them to play around. And by doing that, what it allows is it allows the opportunity of, if they do play through you, then you're close enough to regain possession of the ball. Now, if we look at this clip and we're looking at it from the aspect of it's a 3v3, if we look at this from 11v11, if you're playing a 4-4-2, this might be your 2 forwards that are actually inviting possession to be played around your team shape. So that element of compactness is yet again restricting options and time and space for the opposition. Cover and balance. So this is a crucial aspect of the out of possession principles of play. It's all about getting your players in positions that allow them to cover the person that's potentially looking to press the opposition. The next one we're going to look at is pressing, like we've just touched on there. It's all about obviously trying to force the opponent's decision in terms of what they're trying to do. Some key aspects in this is obviously you're trying to force them to play in a direction to make the game predictable. But at the same time, you're also looking to force them to make mistakes. So it might be by you pressing the opposition, they kick the ball out for a throw-in. And yet again, that would be classed as successful. It's all about thinking about where you are and when you act. So what I mean by that is if you're a defender and you're playing against 2 attackers, you might not necessarily press in that situation because they could potentially play around you because there's a 2v1. So it's all about that composure and awareness of where are you looking to force the ball, and do you have to press straight away? But by pressing there, you could quite easily be played around. So the composure aspect comes in about waiting, taking your time, like the player does in this instance, and almost forcing the opposition to make a mistake. So yet again, from having that cover and balance, which we've seen in a few other clips before there, and that composure in terms of the control and restraint to almost wait for the opposition to make a mistake, they've regained possession of the ball other than looking to press the opposition. It's all about reducing time, space, and options for your opposition when they've got the ball, basically. But if we have this concept of, well, actually, the principles of play all interconnect and actually work together to help you regain the ball, we can almost break this down to on the ball, around the ball, and away from the ball. When you're looking to view your principles, whether that's in your games or training, how do they all interlink? How do they interconnect? So it might be that I'm looking at one principle for that training session, but I might need to have an awareness of how the other principles interlink and work with that principle that we're touching on there. So the first aspect we can see here is compactness. We can see the shape that Brighton have looked to compile and complete is really compact, forcing the opposition to play around them. So by having that element of compactness, they're preventing passes through them. So they're preventing them passing options to go through. As play starts to build a little bit, we can sort of recognize there's an element of control and restraint. So if we flash back to when we looked at that first clip around control and restraint, and it was a 3v3, yet again, it links to 2 forwards in the 11v11 game. So an aspect of recognizing that they can't press because there's an overload. And if they do press, they could be played around. It's probably another key aspect that you can get out within your smaller formats if you're coaching. The next part is all about delay. As you can see here, they're looking to delay the opposition, yet again, preventing them forward passing options. But when the ball does travel through, there's an element of cover and balance that's coming as well. In terms of the fullbacks had to look to press that one in the middle of the park, if they don't, the player on the ball can look to turn and play forwards. And then just behind the ball as well, we've also got the cover and balance of the 3 players there, making sure that actually, because that fullback stepped into the space, the left mid of the team in black is then free. So you've almost made sure that if the ball does go there, someone can deal with that situation. So that's the element of cover and balance that actually came in within this clip. And like we know, going back to pressing, it's all about recognizing triggers to start off with. So that long backwards pass has initiated Brighton to then go and get pressure on the ball, where they was quite successful in winning the ball, and it led to a goal scoring opportunity.
I think it's quite common to view the small-sided game at the end of a session as a kind of a treat for players, whereas for me it's the most realistic practice that we could put on. It's nearest to match day as you can get. So do we coach enough within those small-sided games? And especially at this time of year when we obviously need to keep the players running around and keep them moving in such cold temperatures. It's, as you can see at the top there, we're looking for repetition of whatever topic we're going after. We're looking for realism to the game and relevance to the players we're working with. It's set out in zones. I encourage coaches to have reference points. Quite often I use channels which go up and down the pitch. As I'm sure you know, on 11v11 there are naturally 5 channels off the white lines, so that there are those reference points on match days which players subconsciously take their positions off. So I'm a strong believer that when we have training matches, we should have at very least the halfway line, but the 3/3 are actually quite a nice way of setting the small-sided game up. And we're going to talk a lot about the how at the end of these slides. I'm not going too much around the how, because there's a lot around the 6-player capabilities that we can use. But in terms of the who, it's the nearest player to the ball, I would suggest, and that changes with the speed of the game and the team in possession moving the ball around. But it's also based on, the press is based on, someone said on the chat, around strategy. You know, are we an early pressing team? Do we want to win the ball high at the pitch? Do we want to win it early? Are we a late pressing team? Does that change throughout the game, depending on the state of the game? It might be a predetermined game plan, but actually that might change depending on the scoreline and the situation. Have you been reduced to 10 players, for example? Do you have to rethink how you're going to press? And like someone also said on the chat, it's around triggers and cues of when to press. It might not be on to press. And that's where, as coaches, we can only do so much, but ultimately on game day, then players will need to make those own decisions by recognising, is there an opportunity to press? So again, it's only my preference. I look at the initial pressure on the ball, the press, the delaying of that in and around the ball, then making sure we've got cover and balance, usually behind the ball, because we're usually pressing from the front. So cover and balance is getting into covering positions in relation to teammates, opposition, and the ball itself. So if, for example, a line is broken, the first line of press is broken, we do have numerical superiority behind the ball, and we're in a position to kind of block passing lanes and cover for our teammates. Look here, when the ball gets moving, and the blue team, well, the 2 forwards go to jump a little bit, the others don't, and you can see there, as I paused it, they're actually occupying just about all three of the zones, which depth-wise means there's far too much space. So I was suggesting here a challenge for young players, or any player, would be to try and occupy, out of possession, 2 of the zones. If we occupy 1, there's a danger that we've become too compact and they can play into space. We looked at the Blues here as they go to jump, in terms of their lack of compactness there, in terms of the depth, but look at the width as well. So if you were to draw three channels in there, you can see that the Blues are occupying all three channels. So they're very expansive out of possession, which means there's no compactness. It's going to be very, very difficult for them to win the ball back. This is a great model for helping players, because as it says on the left-hand side there, if players are struggling to execute the principles, we need to help them. So if we look at pressing as an example, if we work our way around the 6 capabilities, then in terms of the position, I would suggest positioning is key. So we can help players by encouraging them to have a good start position in terms of the relation of where they are with the ball. If we're too far off the player, then it's going to be when we arrive too late. If we're too close, it's probably going to deter them from passing the ball to the player. So it's positioning and also our body position to enable us to pounce. Scanning is important. So scanning is assessing the situation, assessing where the ball is, assessing where the opponents are, your teammates. Have you got the cavalry with you? Is that not a good opportunity to go and press because you've got friends with you? Or actually are you on your own and therefore maybe not the right opportunity to press? And also space, recognizing, is the space, can I cover that space and that distance quick enough to try and get close to the ball. The movement's important. If we want to press, certainly if aggressive pressing, then the speed, acceleration, deceleration is important, and obviously the change in direction as well. So these are all things that we can use this tool to help our young players to kind of execute the techniques and the principles. Deception might be, we always think of deception as an in-possession tool, but actually deception might be looking disinterested. And actually, I'm not going to come after you, but as soon as the ball leaves the opponent's foot, then we're onto them, and we're pouncing, and we're pinching, and we're picking the pocket. Timing's key, like we said about the recognizing triggers. Can we arrive at the right time? And similar, as you saw in the last in the practice, the timing of working with your teammates. So if one goes, can we go at the same time? Can we arrive at the same time? I don't think there's a right or wrong in terms of the space of practices, but I think the variety is key. The task, you could change the scoring system to try and execute a strategy. For example, if you want to be a high pressing team, an early pressing team, there might be those 3/3 are used to kind of incentivize winning the ball high at the pitch. If you can win it high, maybe you can get rewarded with more points. It might be you want to drop deep and counter attack from deep, and therefore the press is going to be later. So you incentivize that. So you can toy around with the scoring system. Another nice way to do it, this is something I pinched off Stacey Miles' session, is the equipment. So footballs, we tend to start either end, don't we? Myself included. We get caught in the trap of having the footballs either end because it's an invasion game. The goalkeepers start. Everything's very structured. But actually, can we have footballs on the side of the pitch? Can we play footballs in every now and again, a multi-ball system, getting players to react, getting players to have to press from the side, from behind, from different angles, different distances. Otherwise, if everything's so structured, then on game day, when it's a little bit more chaotic, maybe we haven't prepared those players. So maybe that multi-ball system where they can go and get a ball from anywhere. And then finally, the players part is just looking at overloading and underloading teams and maybe strategically matching players up. So that, again, you'll know your own players, and that's something that you can do.
When we look at this idea of the principles of play, I think it's about language as well. So what kind of language do you use? So if I'm working with younger players, say for example, and it was funny because I actually decided that what I would do is I would I'm not going to try and be ultra clever here and pretend that I didn't write anything down, but I did. I wrote some ideas down. So when you start looking at delaying, what does delaying look like if you're sort of like working with your younger ages? So you might start talking to your players about, can you stop them from going forward? Can you make them go backwards or sideways, and then see if we can't pinch the ball? So when we start to use language like that, we then they start to recognize us. And now you don't have to say, oh, you got to be delaying, you got to be compact, you got blah blah. You don't have to do that. But what you can do is you can start working towards that, because as the players get older, they'll know these terms. They'll start to understand those terms, and you will be able to write them on the board or whatever it is you want to do with them. So look at like things like compactness. I would look at that. Can you get close to your teammates? Can your teammates get close together so that they've got to go round you? They can't go through the middle of you. Make sure they don't go through the middle of you. So those are some of the terms I know I've used in the past when we're out of possession. Well, what are our strengths? What do they do well? You know, what are they struggling with? And that's how we have to base our strategies. Our strategies have to be based on, right, okay, what are they good at to start off with? Because another thing to think about is this: when we're working with our players, when we're working with our teams, we have to look at every session like a block of work. So say, for example, I think this season's roughly about 40 weeks, isn't it? So I always think of it this way, right? Today, we're going to work, say, for example, on pressing from the front, say, for example. How do our front players work? Now, we might spend a lot of time working in that area because, let's say, for example, our front two players don't like doing that type of work. Okay, so how do we then manipulate them to be able to get them to do the things we want them to do? So it might be that we might say to them, I'll tell you what, instead of them going chasing after the ball, what we'll say we'll drop off a little bit and we'll press a little bit later because they'll have more players around them, say, for example. If we've got players who've got high energy, say, for example, we might say, go on, off you go. Go on, press that ball as hard as you can. And then that will allow the rest of us to squeeze up the pitch. So when the team makes a mistake, we can steal the ball, say, for example. There can be sometimes a perception around what defending actually looks like. Oh, we're going to defend, one group's going to defend, and what we're going to do is when we get the ball, we're going to give it back to them, and then we're going to have to defend again. Well, I often think that we have to start to think about it from a slightly different perspective. The reason, and I say this again to my teams, the reason why we defend, and the only reason we defend, is because we want to get the ball back. It's the only reason we're defending. So I always like to have defending sessions where when you win the ball, you have to do something with it. You just don't kick it away. You must keep it and then go and maybe mount an attack or get into an area that gets you to score a goal, say, for example, or pass the ball maybe to the side of the pitch where there's maybe a little small goal or whatever it is, depending on the type of practice that you're doing. So I think, that will look differently. Again, when you talk about age and stage and how the players learn. So when we're talking about defending at the early ages, we have to think about things like tag games, because that's kind of like the defending part, isn't it? We've got to get after people. So, Bulldog is a classic game, isn't it? It's very much a defending game. Who can we tag, as they're running through and so on and so forth, and they come onto our side. So I think those are really, really important. Then as we go through the stages, I think it's then when we start to look at it from, and Steve said this earlier, about having game-based practices. Because I think I think there's so much to be learned in the chaos of the game around defending. How do we empower our players? Because I think that's really, really important as well. Because I remember once somebody saying to me, the problem with football is that you need good decision makers, and you can't teach decision making. And when I heard that, I thought, no, that I don't believe that to be the case. It's the power of your practice. What is it you're going to do in your practice that makes the player have to make a decision, say, for example? And I used the example earlier of the 9 grid game where I said, what you've got to do is you've got to try and nick the ball in a particular square. How many players are you going to send in? When are you going to send them in? Now, those are decisions that are made by the players. And the more you put them in practices like that, the more they'll start to learn about making decisions. And here, 2v2, where we talk about the principles of play, they'll come out. They'll come out. The pressing will come out. The cover and balance will come out. The delay, it will come out in a being compact, as you see there, and the one on the left, as the yellow goes through it. If they're more compact, the yellow doesn't score. So it's those kind of things we have to think about when we're setting up our practices. And I remember when I first got into coaching, and I got to about UEFA B level, and one of the things I did, at games I wrote down the principles of play on my tactics board. So when the game was going on, I could see, right, when we didn't have the ball, are we compact? Are we? And it for me, it acted as a real roadmap for me. It really, really helped me.
So when we look at this sort of house that we're building here, or this player development with the scaffolding, there might also be times where you have to take an element of the scaffolding down whilst the challenge is there, and actually see if the players understand the messages that you're giving them. You're not setting them up to fail. You're basically testing the methods that you've used to work with your players and seeing if it rings true and they're understanding the information that you're providing within your coaching. And yeah, again, if they struggle with that level, you put the scaffolding back up and support them again with the work that they need. But I think there's an element of there of making sure that we build strong foundations so players understand these principles and how they link to the game and how you look to coach them. I think there's an element of, yeah, we've got a structure within our session, but we might have to provide an element of freedom for players to go and explore it. So we don't always have to give them the answers. Let them go and see if they can figure it out. Element of like player empowerment in terms of letting them have a go, see if they can figure it out and work it out before you dive in with a bit of information. Yeah, again, linking back, you might actually give some solutions if they're struggling. And the final thing that I've just touched on there, you've got to give them an element of time. If you're moving from one session to the other session and these sessions don't link, how we expected players to link their messages from one session to the next session and to be able to understand the work that you're doing within the principles.